A barefoot man walks south, alone, into a forest. He has no crown, no guards, no name anyone uses anymore. 20 years earlier, the same man ruled almost everything between the Himalayas and the southern jungles. He didn't lose his empire. He didn't die in battle. He simply set it down like a sore he no longer needed and walked away. Most kings are destroyed by their enemies. A few are destroyed by themselves. Chandragupta Maurya was destroyed by neither, and that is the strangest part of his story. To understand why a man would conquer a subcontinent and then refuse to keep it, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to his birth. Nobody really knows that part. You have to go back to a boy nobody noticed, in a kingdom that thought it was untouchable. The kingdom was Magadha. Its capital, Pataliputra, sat along the Ganges like a fortress with a city wrapped around it. It was ruled by the Nanda dynasty, wealthy, hated, and confident. Their army was enormous. Their treasury was deeper than any in the known world. And their king, by most accounts, was despised by his own people. Into this world walks a man who will undo all of it. But not yet. First, he has to meet his teacher. The traditional story says Chanakya was a Brahmin scholar, sharp-tongued, sharper-minded, humiliated in the Nanda court. He left that court swearing he would tear it down. He just needed the right weapon. He found that weapon in a young man named Chandragupta. Where exactly Chanakya found him is debated. Some traditions say a village, some say a forest, some say a training ground for warrior boys. What matters is what Chanakya saw, not noble blood, but something rarer. A mind that could be shaped and a will that would not break. He took the boy in, and he began to build a king. Chandragupta didn't grow up in palaces. He grew up in strategy. He studied war. He studied politics. He studied how power actually moved, through grain, through spies, through silence. By the time he was a young man, he was no longer a student. He was a project nearing completion. His first attempt at the throne, by tradition, was a failure. He moved too fast. He attacked the heart of Magadha before he had secured the limbs. The Nandas pushed him back. He fled. He almost lost everything before he had anything. The lesson stuck. He would never make that mistake again. So he started over, this time from the edges. He gathered men in the borderlands, hill tribes, mercenaries, soldiers with nothing to lose. He didn't promise them gold. He promised them a future where the Nandas no longer existed. While he built that army, something else was happening in the north. Alexander of Macedon had crossed into India and then turned back, leaving Greek garrisons scattered across the northwest. When Alexander died far away in Babylon, those garrisons became suddenly, dangerously alone. Chandragupta moved into that vacuum like water into a crack. He didn't fight a Greek empire. He fought isolated commanders one by one in territory he understood and they did not. By the time he turned south again, the northwest was his, and his army had learned how to win. Now, he came for the Nandas. This time, he didn't strike the capital first. He peeled the empire open from the outside in. Province by province, fort by fort, road by road, he cut Magadha off from its own body. When Pataliputra finally fell, by most accounts, it fell from the inside as much as the outside. The last Nanda king vanished from history. Chandragupta sat on the throne of Magadha. He was, by some traditions, barely in his 20s. But the man on the throne was not the boy in the forest anymore. He had become something colder and clearer and harder to read. This was the rise. Now came the empire. He did not stop at Magadha. Magadha was only the doorway. He pushed west and south and west again, absorbing kingdoms that had stood independent for centuries. He built an administration that ran on something most ancient empires lacked: paperwork, officials, inspectors, tax records, spies who reported on the spies. According to Greek visitors who came later, his capital had wooden walls, miles long, hundreds of towers, and a moat wide enough to drown an army in. His court ate from fine vessels. His messengers rode roads that stretched from the mountains to the sea. And then, from the northwest, came the test. Seleucus, one of Alexander's old generals, had inherited a slice of the dead Greek empire. and he wanted India back. He marched east with a professional army shaped by the man who had nearly conquered the world. What happened next is one of the most quietly stunning moments in ancient history. We don't know the details of the battles. The sources are thin and tangled. But we know how it ended. Seleucus did not win, and Chandragupta did not crush him either. They signed a treaty. Seleucus handed over vast territories in what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan. In return, Chandragupta gave him 500 war elephants, animals that would later help decide battles thousands of miles away in the Greek world. A marriage alliance was sealed by most accounts between the two ruling houses. For the first time, a ruler from the Indian subcontinent had not just resisted a successor of Alexander, he had outnegotiated him. Stop here for a second. I want to ask you something. Most of the conquerors people talk about, Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, died still grabbing for more. Chandragupta didn't. He's about to do something none of them ever did. Before we get there, I'm curious what you think. Was Chandragupta a greater conqueror than Alexander, or does Alexander still hold the crown? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them, and the arguments down there are usually better than the video. Now back to the story, because the strangest chapter is still ahead. By this point, Chandragupta ruled almost the entire subcontinent. From the mountains in the north to the dry plains of the south, from the western coast to the eastern jungles, the map was his. No ruler before him had held this much of India under one throne. He had wealth no Indian king had ever counted, armies no neighbor wanted to test. He had a son being raised to inherit it all. He had Chanakya, still at his side, still whispering strategy into the machinery of state. By every measure a conqueror is supposed to care about, he had won. And something inside him began to go quiet. The Greek envoy Megasthenes, who lived in his court, described an emperor who almost never appeared in public. He moved through the palace surrounded by women guards, by tasters who checked his food, by a network of suspicion he had built with his own hands. He slept, by some accounts, in a different room every night. This is the part of the story most channels skip, because it's not dramatic in the usual way. It's not betrayal. It's not a coup. It's something quieter and, in a way, heavier. The man who had built the most efficient surveillance state of the ancient world was now living inside it. Every wall he had raised to protect himself had also closed in around him. And then came the famine. According to a long Jain tradition, a terrible drought struck the empire. Some versions say it lasted 12 years. How literal those 12 years are, scholars argue, but the famine itself sits at the heart of one of the oldest stories about him. Crops failed, villages emptied. The granaries he had built were not enough, and something shifted in the emperor. A man who had spent his life taking territory, power, decisions, lives, began to wonder what any of it had been for. Around this time, by the Jain tradition, he came under the influence of a teacher named Bhadrabahu. Bhadrabahu was a Jain monk, part of a tradition that prized non-violence, simplicity, and the deliberate stripping away of self. For a man who had ordered armies into battle and signed away kingdoms by candlelight, it was the exact opposite of everything he had become. And maybe that was the point. What he did next, no other empire builder in the ancient world is recorded as having done. He abdicated. He gave up the throne. By tradition, he handed power to his son, Bindusara, the next link in the chain that would eventually lead to his grandson Ashoka. Then he walked out of his own palace. He left the wooden walls, the towers, the moats, the food tasters, the women guards, the spies inside the spies. He left the empire he had spent his entire life building. And he walked south with Bhadrabahu into the hills of what is now Karnataka. There, by Jain tradition, on a hill called Shravanabelagola, he lived as a monk. No crown, no silk, no army, just a robe and a bowl and silence. And there, by the same tradition, he ended his life through Salakana, the Jain practice of fasting unto death. Not as a punishment, not in despair, as a final, deliberate letting go. Whether every detail of that account is literal history or sacred memory, scholars still debate. But the bones of it, the abdication, the journey south, the monastic end, have been honored at Shravanya for more than 2,000 years. There is a footprint carved into the stone of that hill. Tradition calls it his. Pilgrims still climb up to see it. A king's last mark on the world, and it is the print of a bare foot. Think about what that means. He didn't lose his empire. He didn't have it taken from him. He didn't fall in battle or in his sleep. He looked at everything he had spent his life winning, and he chose to give it back. His fatal flaw, if you want to call it that, wasn't greed or pride or paranoia, though he had all three in his time. It flaw was the same thing that made him great, the ability to see clearly. He could see how empires were built. He could also see, eventually, what they cost. And once he saw it, he could not unsee it. The empire he left behind did not collapse. Then is the other strange thing. His son held it. His grandson Ashoka expanded it further, then famously turned toward nonviolence himself after the horror of the Kalinga War. 2 generations, 2 of the most powerful men in the ancient world, both of them in different ways, walked away from violence after using it to build something enormous. That pattern does not exist anywhere else in ancient history at this scale. It started with the man on the hill. Today, if you fly over modern India, you are flying over land that was first stitched together as one political idea by Chandragupta Maurya. The roads, the administrative grid, the notion of a single subcontinental state, those threads run back to him. The Mauryan lion still stands on India's national emblem. It came from his grandson's pillars. But the empire those pillars rose in came from him. He is not as loud in popular memory as Alexander or Caesar. He didn't have Greek historians turning him into legend in real time. But quietly, stubbornly, his fingerprints are still on a fifth of humanity. And his strangest decision, the walk away, is still the part that haunts. Because every conqueror in history is asked the same question by time. How much is enough? Almost none of them ever answer it. Chandragupta did. If this story moved you, do me a small favor and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love this kind of history. If you're new here, subscribe. We're working through the greatest rulers and conquerors who ever lived, one story at a time, and you don't want to miss what's coming. In the comments, tell me, which ruler should we cover next? Genghis Khan, Cyrus the Great, Ashoka himself. I'm reading. Next time we're going somewhere very different. A man who built his empire in the saddle, on the open steppe, and never once dreamed of walking away from it. Because if Chandragupta is the conqueror who knew when to stop, this next one is the conqueror who never, ever did.